Welcome back to the Jain Logic training videos. Today we're going to take a little deeper dive and look at working with charts and find out all the functionality that you have within the charting tool. As we start, let's look at the ways that we can access the charts. There's really two quick ways. The first is to go to the navigation panel, and here we'll go down to a station, and if you just double click on the station name, this pulls up the charting tool. The second way to do it is actually off the widget. So here we see a chart for that station, and we see the 1 week, 1 month, 3-month view, and then we also see this view button. If you click the view button, it'll pull up the charting tool. So there's two ways to get to charts. So now this has pulled up a chart for the last 3 months for the soil moisture with this site. And I'll walk through all the different options that you have with this chart. We'll try to be organized and start here at the left. So the first option is you can choose a list of all your different sites and move from chart to chart. So we're going to stay on this station, but you can see all the stations you have within Jain Logic are viewable here. The second option is to choose the date span that this chart is covering. So it defaults at the last date span you were looking at. In this case, it was 3 months. But if I want to pull back and look at a 1-month view, I can choose that to the past month. You can also choose a date window and put in a calendar spread. So if you wanted to look at a wider period of time, or you had a very focused period of time you wanted to look at, you can choose that here. As we continue to the right, we have a few more tools. We have the settings tool, and there's a number of settings under this. So let's open this up and look at the options. The first option is to look at the level of detail. So here it's giving us a reading once per day, but you can also increase the frequency of these readings to hourly or to raw, and in most cases raw would be a reading every 15 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and choose the hourly and click OK. Now you can see we have much more resolution in our data. You can see the stair-stepping behavior. Now if we choose to change this to raw, you can see that it's even going to give us higher resolution. The higher resolution you choose will increase the time it takes for the server to load all that data. So normally I'll work in an hourly view. So we'll set that back to hourly. Other options is where the labels display. If you don't want to see any labels, if you want all the labels at the bottom of the charts or on all the data. And then lastly, how large do you want the chart to show? So right now we have it set to fit to screen. So it gives us all the different levels that we're looking, all the sensors we're looking at in this chart, so they fit within the screen. Maybe I want to look closely at something. I can change it to large, extra large. And here you can see it really increases the height span of each chart. The downside is you will have to scroll to see all your levels, but you can really get in and look at the detail. In this case, we're looking at the detail of the stair stepping as water is pulled from the soil profile. So a lot of options there in the way you view. And you can choose to say, I always want to see this at medium, and I want to save that to my preferences. And then each time you go to this chart, it'll show that as your default. Next option over is to print. So you can choose to print your chart, and you can choose which format you want to have it in. So right now it's in portrait view, and we can change that to landscape view. So I'll take that chart and print it. And from here, if you wanted to send somebody a PDF, on this Macintosh, I have an option to save this as a PDF, and many Windows machines have that same option to choose a different printer and choose a PDF printer. Then we can choose to download the chart if you wanted to download this data. And it just downloaded that whole data file to me. So here's this data file. We'll pull that up. and you can see the data per hour. That's the view I've chosen for each sensor. So here's the timestamps and then what sensor the data is for. And the last option is to pull up a window showing stats for your data. So basically, how many data points there are, things like your min and max levels for each of the data tables. So a bunch of detail on the data itself. Then further to the right, we can choose light view. This basically takes the menu bar out so you don't see all your sensors, and it allows you to look at the chart in a bigger view. Or we can go back to full view, and you can see now we see all of our sensors showing again, that sensor list. You have an option to go back to the old charting tool. Some people are comfortable with the old charting tool, so you have an option to go back. And we'll go back to the new view. And then lastly, help. So it just takes you into the help system on the charting tool. Now if we go back over to the left panel and we're looking at the sensor selection window. The sensors that are selected are shown in the blue. If you want to add or remove a sensor, you just click on the sensor. Now we just added in the average soil moisture. And we can remove that back. Then you'll see here where there's these 3 dots next to each sensor. If you click on the dots, it allows you to adjust the values that you have for your boundaries. So here you can see our upper or lower boundaries. And say we want to move this wet boundary up. So we can choose a new value. So we're going to choose 94. And we'll come over here and add 94, tab through, hit save, and now we've changed what that boundary level was. Above the sensors, we have the option to choose what type of chart we want to look at. Currently, we're looking at the soil moisture chart, but maybe I wanted to look at the support chart. And now this is pulling a different set of data coming off the station, but this is more information around technically how well that station's working. So like the cell signal, the battery voltage. And I can choose to go back to my soil moisture. And then the last menu is actions. So in the action menu, we can choose to scale to our boundaries would be the first one. So sometimes if you're well within the boundaries of your management zone, you can't see the upper and lower boundaries because you're really keeping water right between the boundaries. So sometimes it's nice to be able to scale to the boundary so you can see where that upper and lower boundary is. And we'll turn that back off so you can see what I mean by that. Here you can barely see that lower boundary and the upper boundary is just showing. So we'll show you again, and there you can see the boundaries. And then fill gaps. Occasionally, if your station's having a hard time communicating to the cell tower, you'll have little gaps in the data. And we span those gaps so it makes the charts look clean and lets them be easier to read. But if you wanted to see any gaps, you could say turn those gaps off. And in this case, we don't have any gaps in the data. But if you did, you would actually see a little gap between the data. But this cell tower is communicating fine, so there's no gaps. So we'll put that back to fill. And then lastly, save as. So this allows you to save custom chart views. So if I wanted to see my data in a particular view, I could choose which sensors I wanted to see and then save that as a chart. And I have some examples of that. If we go here to soil moisture detail. So soil moisture detail is only showing my irrigation zone and my pressure switch, not the other levels. So this is a chart where I picked what sensors I wanted to see. and I chose Save As, and then I saved it as my soil moisture detail. If I wanted to use this as my default chart, I could choose to also say default. So whenever I clicked on my chart, that would be the chart that showed. In this case, I don't want to use it, so I've got it turned off as default, and I use the soil moisture, the normal soil moisture chart, as my default. So I think that gives you a good overview of the charting tool. I'd really encourage you to dig in and play with these tools. You can't break anything, but it really helps you nail down exactly what you want to look at the charting tool and lets you investigate deeper into what kind of data is coming off your station.